We're grateful to all of our presenters who've joined us today. We're especially grateful to have Congressman John Curtis joining us. It looks like, Congressman, from your office in Washington, D.C., is that right?
That's right, yes.
Lots happening in Washington, D.C. right now, so let's jump right in and let's talk stimulus. You are a member of the Small Business Committee. I know you care a lot about small businesses. You're a businessman yourself. We want to hear what you think about what's coming out of the U.S. Senate and when you think the U.S. House will take this up, and if you think there'll be any changes and any other thoughts you want to share with our participants on the town hall this afternoon. The time's yours.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Well, let me first of all give you kind of a status of the process. The U.S. Senate passed it late last night. They've called a vote on this for us tomorrow. It's expected to go by voice vote. Now, what that means is they'll bring the bill up. If nobody objects to it, it will pass no matter how many members of Congress are there. My guess is there's 30 or 40 or 50 of us that will be there. If one single person objects, it demands a roll call vote, and we have to have a minimum of 218 to pass the bill. So very likely, if one person objects, everything will stop and we'll wait the necessary time to get 218 members here. And that may take through the weekend to get them here. There's a lot of optimism that it will pass tomorrow, and of course, I'm hoping it will as well. I think it's important to note it's the third bill that will have passed, obviously the most substantial. But the reason that's important is people are already talking about a fourth bill. And as I hear from businesses, and I hear this a lot, is, well, you left this out, or what about us? It's very important feedback, because if a fourth bill does come together, we'll want to make sure we have that feedback from everybody. Probably the question I hear the very most is how soon? Once this passes, when will things start happening? The individual checks, we estimated about 3 weeks. If you pay your taxes and give them the IRS your bank account and pay through that or deposit through that, they already have it. The checks will be automatic, and you can see those in 2 or 3 weeks. Perhaps for small businesses, a bigger question is, when will these loans / grants be available? And I know Howard's on the line, and he can help address this as well. But one of the really good things about this bill is every single federally backed financial institution and some state-backed institutions are able to do these loans. You don't have to go to people who have previously done SBA loans. You can go where you already have a banking relationship, walk in that door, call them, and they can expedite it. And I actually believe that will take place literally within hours after we pass the bill. If the banks aren't quite ready for that, I wouldn't blame them. It's going to take them a few days to get their feet underneath them. But if I were a small business, I'd call the bank immediately and get at least in that queue, right, of wanting that loan. And I can go into the details of that loan, but Miles may be doing the details a little bit later. But we expect that to be very quick. The second question I get asked the very most is, did we overreact? And I think that's a legitimate question that we're going to be asking for some months, and we need to ultimately find out the answer to that. But I've heard two things that are important to understand when we consider our reaction to this. We believe that had we not acted the way that we did, that our hospitals would be over capacity. And we've seen that in Italy, and we would literally be making decisions about who gets healthcare and who doesn't. The other thing is the impossibility of isolating those who are vulnerable. The way our culture is, you can't seal grandma and grandpa off from the world. Grandkids come and visit. Here's a really interesting statistic. If you're over 75 years old and you're hospitalized, you have a mortality rate of 52%. And so imagine our senior population if we didn't have that capacity in the hospital. The other thing is 20% of the people that get infected show no symptoms. So the possibility that the grandkids are running around and they're contagious around the grandparents and not showing symptoms is super high. Lastly, and then I'll turn the time back over, is what can we expect? I've heard experts today estimate that New York is about 2 to 3 weeks away from hitting the top of their curve before they start to come down. The problem is we expect other New Yorks, cities that will flare up the way that New York has flared up. And they'll each have their own little cycle of how long it takes to get over the top of that. it's looking like mass transit might be a culprit in this. They're calling this germ sticky, meaning it stays on surfaces for a long time. And that may be why New York and some of these other large cities are going to have a problem. And the estimate I heard from the doctor today is about mid-April to late April before, as a country, we really start to see this thing head down. And the goal is to get this mass testing out there. Then we can do random testing. And then instead of treating the whole entire population, we can treat isolated areas and isolated flare-ups. Now with that, Derek, let me send it back to you, and just thanks for letting me participate.
Thank you, Congressman. If you still have a few minutes, would it be okay if I asked you a couple questions that we've seen coming in?
You bet. I'm here for the duration, so whatever's helpful.
Thank you. I listened to an interview a couple days ago. At the time, it was in anticipation of this third wave that we're now seeing going through the Senate, now coming to you in the House. And the interview was with an individual who was part of the stimulus package, putting the stimulus package together in 2008. Now, I think, all understand that 2008 is very different than today for a lot of reasons. But the person asking the question, I thought it was a very good question, and it was, what do you think we learned from 2008 with regards to federal stimulus that applies to today? And the answer he gave, and I'd love to get your reaction to this, the answer he gave was, what I learned was that we needed to go big, we needed to go bold, and we needed to go fast. And we didn't do, Congress didn't do any of those three things, meaning in 2008. I think from what we've seen in the three tranches that have come out now, that it is big, it is bold, and it is moving fast, but I'd love to get your reaction.
Well, I'm smiling because all three of those adjectives don't describe Congress, right? Big, bold, and fast. And I personally think, as I've watched the Senate, we have to be very, very careful. We're trying to legislate $2 trillion in hours. And we learned with the second bill that we can get things wrong. And we were literally back on the floor within hours fixing that bill. And we really hurt, quite frankly, small businesses with the unemployment tax on that, because we moved so quickly and had to come back and fix that. So I would say yes, big, yes, bold, and at least taking those day or two extra, not a week or two, but that day or two extra to really try to refine this. We saw an issue come up in the Senate yesterday, and they spent another 6 to 10 hours on that. I'm glad they did. It's very, very hard to go retroactive. And when we move as a Congress, it is big and clunky and really hard to undo. So I wasn't here for that 2008, but I would say fast with a little asterisk that says not too fast.
Thank you. And one other question for you that's come in from those who are participating on the town hall. And I actually got this question yesterday when I was doing an interview, and it was, is what we're hearing too good to be true, specifically for small businesses? Here's what they were alluding to. And it was, some people are saying that they expect these SBA loans to be forgiven. Now that's sort of a dangerous question to answer, but if you're willing to, not asking you to go on the record yes or no, but just to share your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I've been asked that question, like, okay, what's the catch, right? This is too good to be true. Let me just tell you genuinely, as I talk with my colleagues, to a person, all I hear is small business. We've got to help small business. There is a genuine interest to reach out and help small business. People need to be, like any loan that they would take out, it wouldn't hurt to consult your attorney and everything like that. But as a general rule, what we're trying to do is money that's spent under certain conditions on payroll, on mortgages, on utilities, will be forgiven. So go in eyes wide open with an attorney. But that is the intent of this bill, is to get immediate help to our small businesses who we genuinely want to help.
I know I told you that was the last question. I'm going to ask you one more.
That's fine. And I'll hang on the line, by the way, there are more questions.
This one, I'm going to ask you to take off your congressman hat and put back on your businessman hat. I was on KSL this afternoon doing an interview over the noon hour. It was a call-in show. Someone called in and they asked me, I thought it was a really, really poignant question. And it was this, and I'd love to get your take on it. The question was, I want to keep my employees on the payroll. We're struggling like everybody else. And then the person said, it looks like I've got two options. One is I let my people go, and then they go and they apply for unemployment insurance. My second option is I try to get an SBA loan so that I can continue to pay my people. And then this business owner asked me, what do you think I should do? And that was a tough question for me. I was not expecting. I had to think a lot about it. I'm not going to tell you what my answer was because I want to hear your answer.
Well, my answer is, I think for once Congress has done something for you, something good. And that is keep them on payroll, take out the small business loan, and you will not be asked to pay those dollars back. Now, let me just reaffirm, work with your lawyers and your accountants as you get into these loans, but that is the intent. We did this so people will keep employees on the payroll. That's exactly why we did this. So the answer is keep them on the payroll, keep those wheels turning. I've seen so many creative things come out of Utah in the last couple of days. Figure out how you can minimize the damage and get through this storm, and we'll get on the other side, and then you'll be glad you kept those employees.
Well, I'm really glad to hear your answer. That was my answer too. And the other reason I gave for that answer to this business owner was it's hard to find good people. Yeah. And you put a lot of resources into them and training into them. And when you found a good person, the last thing that you want to do is let them go. And then in a couple months, be looking to hire somebody new and starting that process all over again. So I'm glad we were in alignment. And thank you again, Congressman Curtis, for joining us. And thank you for staying on. We may have some additional questions for you, but at this time, I want to go to the Dean of the University of Utah Business School, the David Eccles Business School, Taylor Randall. And Dean Randall is going to tell us about what his organization, he runs that business school like a business, and he's going to talk to us about what he's doing to implement the plan that Governor Herbert released this week, the Utah Leads Together plan. Dean Randall, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Derek, and thanks for giving me just a few minutes. Many of you have seen this plan, and I think there's some smart pieces to this that really allow you to provide some stability to both your businesses and your employees. The plan begins by giving us three phases: an urgent phase where we're going to see in society this virus increasing in its virulence, a stabilization phase, and then a recovery phase. And those three phases have allowed us to do some pretty significant planning at the business school. And I'll give you a few examples. The first, I think, key element of that plan is that the phases give you a length and a time horizon around which to plan. So to give you a very, very simple example, when we take a look at at phase one, the urgent phase, we know that that will last 8 to 12 weeks. And that tells us immediately that classes this summer will probably be online. And so I immediately begin to get my faculty and my staff thinking about how we bring students in online for the summer. The second thing that I think is important is it also provides a government response and society's response. So we know that we'll be in periods of social distancing and social isolation. It allows you then to plan where your employees should be and how you're going to work. And then the final thing that I think it does for us in some very important ways is it gives us a prediction for how many people might be infected, especially in my workforce. And so we've already started to think about how we might cross-train individuals and create backup plans so that we don't have disruption of our operations. So if I were to summarize, I think the big important pieces of this are that it gives you some phases that you can plan around. It gives you some predicted and anticipated societal and government response. And finally, you can infer how your customers and your employees will be affected by these rates. And that has allowed us to put together basically a 6-month plan. We've been able to put some big targets in place. We actually see some opportunities in education Many of you will have employees that will want to retool during this time period. And so we're going to be offering special products online for individuals who want to pick up some skills, perhaps in the information technology sector or project management sectors. And we see great opportunities. But at the same time, it also keeps us from over-investing in some of our plans that depend a little bit more on more social interaction. So we've been grateful to have the basic framework, and hope that it certainly helps us in the way we're seeing the future of our business. Derek, thanks for giving me a few minutes.
Thank you, Dean. And I'd love to have you tell us in a couple minutes that we have left with you about, we all know that students, college students, including your students in the business school, have moved to online education. Can you tell us about how that's gone, what feedback you've received?
Sure. I think that we've seen some good and some bad as we've made this transition. At our school, we had to move 560 classes online in the period of basically 1 week. And we found a couple of things. The first is, in some ways, there's better communication between students and faculty now because of the direct and immediate ways that they can communicate via technology. So that's been, I think, the good side. Some of the things we're grappling with is really the disruption to the personal lives of students. So we've got students that have headed home. They may not have technology available to communicate. We have students that have gone home to families whose parents have lost jobs, and they're now providing daycare for those students. And so we've had to find ways to work around a typical classroom schedule and work in what we call an asynchronous manner, where you post videos and post homework, and then people work independently. That has actually stretched the way we teach. And again, you discover some great things through that and some things that you need to improve on. But I would say overall, we've been able to make the transition relatively seamlessly, and certainly have some things we can work on, but it's been good for us so far.
Thank you for that update. One of the things that we always try to do is to make this crisis very real, and by telling a story of businesses that are being impacted. And today on the town hall, we want to go off the Wasatch Front to get an off the Wasatch Front perspective. We've invited Don Willey, who's the president of the St. George Area Chamber in Washington County, to join us and talk about what he's seeing in Washington County. And he's also got one of his businesses there in the St. George area to share the story about how they are adapting, innovating, and overcoming. Don, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Derek. We're glad to be on the call. We had to close the shades down here with all the sun, so we're enjoying a little bit of warmth and hoping that that sun will help stave off this virus a little earlier as we hear some reports. So hopefully that may play into our advantage. But glad and pleased to be with you all today and to introduce one of our awesome businessmen and entrepreneurs down here in Southern Utah who's using this challenge as an opportunity to pivot and adjust. And that person is David Moody. He's an entrepreneur, business owner, restaurateur, and investor. He's a Utah native, but moved back to Utah after 30 years in Las Vegas. He's owned and operated over 20 businesses, including restaurants, hotels, casinos, and is currently running a brewery, a distillery, and a winery in Washington County. He's a graduate of BYU and SUU and an active member of the St. George Area Chamber community. With that, I'll let David tell a little bit more about his business and what he's doing during these times. You might have to unmute, David.
Yeah, there we go. You got me okay now?
We got you.
Everybody. Hey, my sunglasses, I'm sorry. My glasses turned, I was outside just listening, as Don was saying. But we own, like I say, a winery, a distillery, and a brewery here in St. George. Luckily, half of our business has gone away because of the restaurants and the bars. We ship beer out. our beverages out by the semi-load. Las Vegas, we're into Arizona a little bit, and throughout the state of Utah. In our canning production, we're in all 53 Smith's grocery stores, Walmarts, Mavericks. So the canning side of it's worked out well for us. What we've done is we got a letter from TTB about a week ago. And so what we did was we took our distillery and turned it into where we're now making hand sanitizer. Actually, we're making an all-purpose sanitizer to where we are going to put it in spray bottles so people can put it on their person. Spray bottle will be 1 and 2 ounce bottles. They can take it with them and spray a door handle or spray a shopping cart. If they're traveling, it's a water consistency. We're following the WHO and the FDA guidelines through the TTB direction. And basically, we should have, our product, our labeling's just being done right now. So we should have our product out and running within about a week from today. Might take a little longer, a week and a half, but that's one thing that we've done. And we're going to continue to run this hand sanitizer as part of our ongoing business, because we think this will be something that we can use in Utah, also in Las Vegas, because we are pretty close to the Las Vegas market, and throughout Utah and Arizona. So that's what we've gone to. We have had to lay people off in Vegas, obviously, but our Utah, we're doing great. Our canning lines are still running, so we're able to keep our beverages going throughout the state of Utah. That's Don, anything else you want to add at all, or any other questions or anything anybody's got, just let me know.
David, thank you for that report. I just, even in the middle of these emergencies and crisis, I love to see what businesses are doing to be innovative and to stay in business. Don, thanks for arranging to have David come and speak to us. Any final words from you?
We're seeing, the early stages. We're a little bit behind what we're seeing probably in northern Utah. One thing I did just want to mention that we're working very closely and collaboratively as a community, and we just released this about an hour ago through help from our county, our cities, and then also several private donors. We have put together, at this point, it's an $800,000 small business loan program that's meant to be a gap program until those SBA funds can come in. They can apply and secure those. So our businesses and throughout Washington County are now eligible to secure $20,000 loans that they can use in that gap financing. We're still waiting on some additional contributions and hope to hit that $1 million mark to provide that for our businesses. But we felt that was a great way that we would be able to support them, that we could move a little quicker, more agile than we might see with banks. But there are banks that are actually contributing to this because they see the obvious need of providing that funding very quickly and injecting it into these businesses. And we hope to actually have our first awards by mid next week to businesses.
That's great. And Don, where can those businesses in Washington County find out information about how they can access that? GreaterTogetherFund.org is the website. The application's online as well as all the information. So once again, that's GreaterTogetherFund.org. We took a lot of our lead from Salt Lake City. They were extremely collaborative and willing to share information about their loan program. And so I encourage anyone that's interested in developing something similar in their communities to work with them. We're also happy to answer questions too, but GreaterTogetherFund.org. Thanks, Don, and thanks, David, both for joining us. We're talking a lot today about the federal stimulus program. That's all over the news. It's on everyone's mind. And for a little bit of a deeper dive, we've invited Miles Hansen, who's the president and CEO of the World Trade Center Utah. He's also leading the committee that is part of the Economic Response Task Force, specifically working on federal stimulus issues, making sure that we understand what's in those bills, making sure that businesses understand what resources are available, as well as working with our congressional delegation and communicating back to them the needs of Utah businesses, employers, and employees. So Miles, thanks for joining us. And I know people will be eager to hear about what you've been assessing and what you can share with them about the stimulus bill.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Derek, for having me on. And first off, hats off to Don and David. Talk about great examples of adapt, innovate, and overcome. And it's been great to hear stories like that from across the state as all of us rally together to do everything we can to minimize the economic disruption caused by COVID-19, while at the same time making sure that we're protecting the health of ourselves, our families, our communities, and ultimately the entire state. So what I'll do in just a few minutes I have today, Derek, if it's okay, I'll start off with a quick overview of the stimulus package. Then I'll talk a little bit about what the Economic Response Task Force is doing to make sure that as many businesses and individuals as possible are able to utilize these federal programs and resources. And then I'll wrap up by making sure we spend a couple minutes talking about where Utah businesses can go for additional details and to get assistance and to participate in these programs. So first off, let's talk about the stimulus package. It's been in the news. So I'm confident that many people who are listening today have seen some of the kind of top line issues. But what I thought I could do is provide a little bit of context around the package. It's interesting to note the size of the package, with including some of the Fed actions. It works out to be, $2.3, $2.4 trillion. Just last night for fun, I checked at what US GDP was last year. And it's interesting, the stimulus package accounts for just about 10% of the US GDP last year. And I thought that was interesting because really the intent of this package is to fill the gap that's occurring in the economy as we press pause on the economy to make sure we can get out in front and ahead of the curve on what's coming with coronavirus. And so you see this massive package pulled together very, very quickly. It is big, it's bold, it's fast, and hats off to Congressman Curtis and everybody else in Washington who pulled it together. So the package is built around 5 different pillars. You have a health pillar, small business pillar, pillar for workers and families, a pillar that looks at taxes and how to help everybody in the country through some updates to our tax code and structure for this year. And then the 5th pillar is looking to shore up distressed industries as well as to support states and local municipalities. So on the health pillar first, the faster, more successful we are at addressing the health challenges, the less costly and easier it is going to be to push through the economic pain that we're all experiencing. So the stimulus package brings $100 billion in grants to hospitals, healthcare providers, suppliers, $16 billion to purchase personal protective equipment, ventilators, which we've heard a lot about in the news, and other medical supplies, and then several $billion to go directly to state and local public health officials, again, to try to shore up this aspect of the fight against COVID-19 and to create more space in which we can help the economy continue to move forward. And there are many, many other provisions included in that health pillar. The second pillar I mentioned is the small business loans and grants. And this is what we've heard a lot of people talking about in the news, and we're getting a lot of questions about. So let me break this down just a little bit. The package includes just about $350 billion in small business loans. And so what's a small business? The law talks about businesses that have fewer than 500 employees. There often is a revenue cap as well that goes with that. That revenue cap usually is about $35 million, but it varies industry to industry. And so for every business out there, right now as the stimulus package is being finalized, now is the time to jump online. If you Google, am I a small business? I'm sure you'll see some results where you can go in, input data about your business and quickly find out whether or not you qualify as a small business. But these qualifications are more generous and a little bit looser than what we've seen in the past. So for these small business loans, there are 2 primary types of loans that are part of the stimulus. One is a paycheck protection loan. That is capped at $10 million, but it's really calculated as what is 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. So go back over the past 12 months, figure out what your payroll in and other fixed costs have been on a monthly basis, times that by 2.5, and that will give you the amount of credit or loans that you will be eligible for. These loans will be fully backed, are guaranteed by the federal government until the end of 2020, at which point they'll be guaranteed up to 85%. Again, working hard to make sure that we are not putting risk on the finance industry, but the government is stepping in to assume some of that risk. And the program is designed, again, like we talked about before, keep the economy going, even though we're paused. Is designed to help small businesses have the resources they need to maintain payroll, to pay rent, to cover other fixed costs during this period where many businesses are experiencing significant reductions in revenues or have been forced to shut down entirely. To access this loan, companies don't have to go to the SBA. If they have an approved, if you're already working with an approved lender, which is most banks here in Utah, you can go to your lender. They're going to have details about this program and be able to help you without going to the SBA. If you don't yet work with a lender who is an approved lender, then you can go to the SBA, and the SBA will help. And we'll talk about in a couple minutes what we're doing to make sure the SBA is able to be very responsive to the tsunami of requests that they're receiving. The second type of loan that is most applicable to people listening today would be the emergency disaster loan. This loan is an expansion of the program that was announced about a week and a half ago and passed by Congress. So people are a bit more familiar with this loan. This loan is different in that you do have to go to the SBA. For now, there's talk about making changes so that we don't overwhelm the SBA and people can go to their lenders. But for now, it is something that you do approach the SBA. You apply through the SBA. These loans don't require any personal guarantee for loans less than $200,000. The cap is $2 million. And the significant thing here is the government will pay both principal and interest for the first 6 months of the loan. In addition to that, as soon as a business applies, they receive a $10,000 advance immediately, or as immediate as a bureaucracy can be. But very quickly, they receive $10,000 that they don't have to pay back, even if they end up not being qualifying or being approved for the loan. So again, with both of these programs, the intent is to how to inject liquidity into small businesses to help keep them open, keep people on their payrolls. With both of these loans, for that 8-week period that they're designed to bridge, as long as companies maintain their workforce, don't lay people off, they're using the loans to cover payroll, they're covering fixed expenses, mortgages, payments, those types of things, then the loan as written in the bill right now, it explicitly says that those expenses would be written off, they'd be forgiven. And so then essentially, as long as you use these loans for the intent they're designed to be used for, they will be forgiven, and companies won't have to pay those back. I'll leave that there. If we have time for questions, I can get into a few more details on the small business loans, but there are a couple other things I think are important for people listening to be aware of. The third pillar of the stimulus package is designed to support workers and families. And these are, we've all heard about the direct payments, $1,200 for individuals, $2,400 for couples. After $75,000 in income per year for an individual, or $150 for a couple, for every $100 more somebody makes, there's $5 taken off of these payments. Each child, you get $500, and so then that extends a little bit the upper threshold of where people can expect some sort of support. Also, major changes and increases to our unemployment insurance, and so this package would increase by $600 per week what people on unemployment would receive on top of what they're receiving through the state. And it's extending that unemployment period for 4 months. So again, trying to find ways, people who've already been laid off, how do we support them, make sure that they can pay their rent, continue to participate in the economy. Once we come out of this thing, then they'll be in a better position to jump back in, get jobs, and continue to move the economy forward. The fourth pillar is based on tax adjustments that are designed to help provide kind of a second tranche of liquidity assistance for businesses after these initial loans come through. And so they're mostly adjustments to what tax credits the businesses will receive when they do their taxes. And so these are Some of them are changes to the tax reform bill that passed in 2017. And so one thing that I'll note here are qualified improvements. Since January 1st, companies will be able to write all of that off as depreciation. So for example, if you own a chain of McDonald's and you spent $3 million in January of 2018 in order to improve the inside of your McDonald's restaurants as part of the stimulus package, you then can go and write off as depreciation everything that you spent in January 2018 minus what you may have already written off over the past year. And the limits have been about $75,000 on a $3 million spend. And so that significantly creates new opportunities for companies to write off these expenses they've incurred over the past couple of years as a way of, again, reducing the taxes they're going to have to pay when it comes to pay taxes. They're also waiving the penalty for early retirement distributions. Employers can pay for the student loan payments for employees up to $5,200 tax-free. Right now, those types of programs are taxed as income. And there's also a payroll tax credit where, and this is interesting, you will get a credit now, this year's taxes, for what you're paying in payroll during this period of time, but you don't have to pay your payroll taxes until 2021 or 2022. And so you get this in advance in terms of credit, and then you can defer your payroll taxes up a year, 50% in 2021 and 50% in 2022. And so again, I highly encourage you, some of these tax adjustments are fairly complex. I'm not smart enough to understand all of them, but they are significant when you look at it. And I really encourage businesses to prioritize, get those loans, get that immediate liquidity, but then really understand what they're trying to do to help you with your tax burden as well. And then very quickly, the fifth pillar is to support distressed industries and institutions. These are, supporting the hotel industry, airline industry, other large corporations will make sure they, through the package, and Howard will know more about this, making sure there's a great liquidity in the markets so that companies can get the capital they need, as well as $150 billion to states, of which Utah should expect to see about $1.5 billion. And so now that's all great. It's a lot of information. It's overwhelming. What's the task force doing to help make sure companies benefit from this? Through the Federal Engagement Committee, we are standing up a rapid response team. We put out a call for volunteers just a day ago. We've been overwhelmed with almost 100 people saying they want to volunteer to be part of this rapid response team. A key bottleneck in this process is going to be SBA. Here in Utah, they have two lending specialists that typically can handle the SBA loans. They are going to be completely overwhelmed. And so we are standing up this rapid response team to augment the resources they have and the personnel they have so that every Utah business can quickly and efficiently get responses, get applications in, get the information that they need, and move their way through this process. And so please keep your eye out for opportunities. We'll be pushing out a lot of information through all of our channels from the task force to make sure that people have up-to-date, accurate, concise information about all these programs, who is eligible, so you can quickly go down the list and see which ones apply to you and which ones don't. Those that apply to you, you can jump in and avail yourself of those opportunities. And with that, Derek, I'll just finish by, again, echoing what you've always encouraged people, which is to go to coronavirus.utah.gov/business for the latest up-to-date information about everything that I've covered here. And as we get more details about how this program will work in the regulations, that is going to be the single best source of information on these programs. And again, just to reiterate, know for everybody out there that we have a strong team working very, very hard to make sure that we reduce to the greatest extent possible the barriers for people to be able to come to participate in these programs. Eric, over to you.
Miles, that was terrific. If people didn't already know, they will not be surprised to know that Miles used to work in the White House and give briefings to the president. You can see why he's good at what he does. You may know more about this bill than the people who actually wrote it. So good job, Miles. Thank you for that.
So Derek, I don't know if it was a high point or a low point, but I was trying to get some information last night at about midnight, and I actually went to the bill and searched down in this 800-page bill to find what I needed to find. And it is complex, and it's not even finalized yet. So the information will change. But again, if people go to the website, that's where they're going to get the information as we all figure this thing out, because it's mammoth, it's big, but there's a lot of value for Utah businesses and individuals in there.
Terrific. Thank you, Miles. Now we want to move to the director of our State Office of Travel and Tourism, Vicki Varela. Everybody knows that this is an industry that has been hit the hardest. And we thought it would be important for all those participating to hear from Vicki about what's happening in her industry. Thanks, Vicki, for joining us.
Thanks, Derek. I just want to acknowledge Congressman Curtis. Thank you for being with us. And I want to assure you, you have not overreacted. I also want to thank Miles for this overview of all these critical programs that are going to make the difference between our businesses and tourism surviving. I'm in conversations every day with longtime guides and outfitters, hoteliers. Are you having problems hearing me?
I can hear you, Vicki. Go
Okay,
ahead.
good. We're in conversations every day with hoteliers, guides and outfitters, restaurateurs who are facing the question of whether they will make it another day. It's a $9.75 billion industry. If you break that down into daily spending, we usually have $26 million churning through the Utah economy from visitors. We're at 10% of that at the very best right now. And so we're looking at losses of upwards of $20 million in visitor spending. One example, I think he's on the line with us today, Dennis Kopiak. We all know La Bus and have had traveled in La Bus tours through the Olympics and other major events. 102 of his 107 buses are idle. So he's operating at 1% right now. So we're innovating. We're doing all that we can in every sector to try to get through this and to try to help protect public safety. Some examples. It was so great to hear from our friends in St. George today, which, by the way, that's a fantastic destination that everybody needs to check out as soon as we can travel again. The ways that we're innovating, first of all, we had to recognize 11 days ago that we should stop mass marketing. We're not out there promoting travel right now. It wouldn't be responsible. It would not be consistent with what we've heard from Kristen Cox and others about the vigilance that's necessary to protect public safety. But we are starting to innovate around how we will get back into market when it's the right time. We can't just go back to business as usual because we've had such a significant drop in everything that we've got to have Mighty Five type of innovation when we come back into the market. So we're working on that marketing strategy. We have hotels around the state that are in conversations with hospitals, with counties, about ways that they may accommodate the overflow so that the critical COVID patients can be cared for properly. You know about restaurants. I'll remind you to, I'm doing takeout at least 3 days a week. I've already found some great new restaurants. One of my favorites, Saffron Valley, many of you are familiar with. She has a Keep Calm and Curry On program where she takes care of a different sector of the industry every single week. And so medical providers this week, they get a free meal if they just show up with their proof of that they're part of the medical community. All sorts of resourceful things going on like that around the state. One that inspires me, again, to our friends in St. George, Zitava in Ivans has become a resource center for restaurant workers who don't have enough food, they've been laid off, and they can go to Ztava and get the resources that they need. It's great to see our friend Ty Burrell from Modern Family, who has launched, along with Downtown Alliance, the Tip a Server program. See if you can't find extra money for all your servers when you do the takeout. Don't skip the tip just because you're doing takeout. We heard about the distilleries. Distilleries all over the state have started distilling hand sanitizer in addition to everything else they distill. So lots of innovation going on, but we desperately need help. And the best way of measuring it, it may surprise you that I find this to be heartening, but we got concrete news today from a survey that Visit Salt Lake has done. Entrada, great research company here in the Valley, surveyed hoteliers in Salt Lake County. They got responses back so far from 124 hotels and other tourism industries. The 124 companies, 7,800 jobs within those 124 companies. And the news they gave back was sobering along the lines of everything I've just said, but it also gives us concrete information to figure out how to start solving the problem. It's just as Kristen Cox has talked about with the COVID testing, the more we know about exactly where the pain is, where the problems are, the better we can start to address them. So these businesses told us that half of them will be out of cash within 60 days. This is where I say, Congressman Curtis, you did not overreact. The loans that Miles has described are so desperately needed for these businesses. Val Hale, the Governor's Office of Economic Development, has moved very quickly with the state and local initiative, the state and local task force, to try to figure out ways that we can get bridge loans before all these SBA loans kick in. We know these businesses will need it, and we're optimistic that something can be pulled together very quickly. This would be along the lines of what I congratulate Washington County that they have already stepped up and done, along with Salt Lake County. It's essential for our businesses to get this third level of federal support that I know Congressman Curtis referenced they're working on. All of these tools are necessary for so many of our businesses to actually survive over the next 60 plus days. I will close. I was inspired by something Dr. Good at University of Utah said yesterday. We all know that crisis is the mother of invention and so forth. And he observed that we went through a very difficult period, very big question mark around travel after 9/11. And we innovated and we got TSA. He called for the health equivalent of a TSA, a way that our country can come together and test whether people are healthy so that healthy people can travel. I say we should all get on board with that innovation. I do want to make sure that we don't have to take our clothes off again once we get to the airport on this one. We learned some things we didn't like about TSA as it came together. So that's my summary. Thanks, Derek, for all the work that's being done on the task forces. When we started into this a week ago, it was a question mark whether we could move quickly. And I'm now finding that every one of these task forces is moving so fast, churning so much information, that it gives me great optimism that we are finding a path toward victory.
Thank you, Vicki. It's a sobering report, but it's important information for everyone to understand the reality of what's happening out there and the importance of the different programs that Miles spoke about. Speaking of those programs, Miles, I understand that your team is putting a one-page summary together from your report that will be available on coronavirus.utah.gov. Do I understand that correctly, Miles?
Yep, that's correct. We've got various federal partners, congressional delegation offices, a team in place is going to pull this information from these various sources. To be honest, I can't promise it'll be one page because this is a big package, but it is going to be as concise as possible. We've charged them to not only gather the information, but we need to protect our businesses from information overload. So to distill it down to the key points, we are going to have the 1.0 version out tomorrow. It'll be up on the website. And then we're going to lean on all the task force members to push that out through our email channels to try to make sure we get this information out to every business in the state.
Thanks. Thanks again, Miles, and thanks again, Vicki. Our last presenter today is Howard Headley, who's the president of the Utah Bankers Association. As I said, we're dedicating a lot of time on today's town hall on this subject of the SBA loans, but we're doing it because it's important information. And Howard, we're grateful that you're taking time to join us. We'd like to hear from you about how people can access this funding that's coming through Congress. Go ahead.
Derek, thank you for inviting me. It's I found the first comments to be very interesting about too good to be true. You know, we often encourage folks that if something's too good to be true, it usually is, and it's usually a scam or something. And I think that actually could be one of the big problems we have with this program, because it's kind of too good to be true. And I get a lot of the same questions over and over again because I don't think people can believe that these loans that they're going to receive are going to be forgiven. And so it's important to kind of go through it. At the same time, I have no doubt that there will be criminals out there reaching out to your small business members and trying to scam them. You know, you've seen it before, all this federal money and people trying to insert themselves in between that and in an attempt to get information from your small business owners. So I would just encourage people to be very, very careful in the next couple of weeks. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. The banks are waiting on guidelines from the SBA, and we really can't proceed to process these loans until they come up with those guidelines and give them to us. But as soon as we get those guidelines, we'll be able to turn these loans around really pretty quickly. We're still have to look and see if those guidelines require any kind of an in-person. We're hopeful that that's not the case given the pandemic, that it's something that we can do mostly electronically, and that will speed things up as well. But Secretary Mnuchin last night on a briefing indicated that his goal and his expectation is by the end of next week, every bank in the country would be able to originate one of these loans same day. So that's the challenge that we face. We'll wait for the SBA to come up with the guidelines, and hopefully they're very simple. And then we'll just have to deal with the demand. And so I would encourage folks to begin that conversation with their lenders. As was noted, any federally insured depository, whether that's a bank or a credit union, will be in a position to be able to administer these loans. Some will obviously probably do better than others. You know, it's a dynamic marketplace, but they've also opened this up for all kinds of different lenders to get approved through the Treasury to make these loans. And that's kind of where I think it's going to get a little bit foggy. You might have people reaching out to your small businesses saying, we can get you this money, we can do this for you. Just going to want to make sure that they're, you know, on the SBA list and that it isn't part of a scam. I would just absolutely hate to see a small business person give somebody their information that can be used in a scam and have to deal with that in addition to everything else that we're dealing with right now. So I'd urge caution there. I've tried to answer as many questions as I can in this little Q&A module that you've got here, Derek, and Unfortunately, I think I'm only through about 26 of the 100 questions that are out there. But
let me help you with that by asking you some of the questions that we've seen coming through.
Okay.
By the way, I love the reminder about going to a trusted source.
Yeah.
One of the most common questions that we've been getting, not just on this town hall, but even prior to it, has been, do I need to go to the SBA first, or should I go to my lender first? What's the answer to that question?
Okay, and the reason why this is confusing is because the disaster loans are direct to the SBA, and you go to their website and you fill those out, and those are I've talked to a number of people where that process is slower than what you would expect when you think of a disaster loan, and I know there's frustration out there about that. There's nothing that we can do about that. That's a direct loan with the SBA. I believe this Paycheck Protection Program is a much better deal. It should be your top priority because, again, to the extent you have payroll costs, rent costs, or interest on mortgage, depending whether you rent or own your building, and utility costs, in the 8 weeks after you get your loan, to the extent you have those qualifying costs, that will simply be forgiven against that loan. So if you borrow $1 million and you have $1 million in those other costs, your loan will be forgiven. If you borrow $1 million and you only have $800,000 in those other qualifying costs, you'll walk away with a $200,000 loan that will be amortized over up to 10 years. You won't have any loan payments on that loan for 12 months. So it's not a penalty. It's not a bad deal at all. To the extent that you have those payroll costs, the utility costs, the rent costs, and that meets or exceeds the loan you took out, the loan would be entirely forgiven. Now, your question was, if it's a disaster loan, you go to the SBA. If you want this loan, the Paycheck Protection Program loan, you would go to a lender.
And the second most asked question has been, do I need to wait until it passes Congress? We know it's passed the Senate, it's going to the House. Should people wait, or should they contact their lender already?
Well, we've been working on the guidelines with the SBA since about Sunday with the White House in anticipation that this would pass. And the bill has hit a couple of hiccups. And of course, it's not yet passed right now, but we don't anticipate any changes from the version that passed the Senate. So we're working on that basis of what passed the Senate. The SBA is working through the guidelines, and they're working with banks to say, how's this going to work the best? How's this going to work the easiest in terms of processing? Let me give you a little perspective on this. The SBA program last year processed about $49 billion in loans. That's all of last year. They want to process $350 billion of these loans in like a 2 or 3 week period. That's got to be realistic. That probably isn't going to happen. But there's going to be this flurry of activity, and we just have to wait until we get those guidelines. But again, Mnuchin indicated that he's hopeful by the end of next week that banks would be able to make these loans same day, meaning you would have the proceeds that day. That means that the SBA is going to have to get those guidelines out today or tomorrow. And then we're going to have to digest them and create processes around them and then be ready to go. But I would be in touch with your bank. Please be patient. I don't know that they'll keep a queue. Maybe they'll make a queue. Every bank will probably deal with it differently. But I think the most important thing is, as I try to think through what you would need, clearly you're going to need some payroll data. So if you started right now by pulling your payroll together, looking at your average monthly payroll over the last 12 months, they have indicated that if you have a seasonal business and you can demonstrate that your seasonal payroll in, say, April and May is usually higher, they'll increase the loan amount for that. So there's some flexibility there, but we'll need your payroll data.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you for that report. Thanks to all of our presenters. 2 final reminders as we conclude this Thursday town hall. Number 1, Vicki Varela talked about the Tip Your Server. You can find out about that information at downtownslc.org. And then, as always, the clearinghouse for all of the information that we've been talking about, including the one-pager on the stimulus bill, soon to come at coronavirus.utah.gov. Click on the business section. We'll see you all on Tuesday. Thanks.